You don't have to bring up or talk about death when you want to talk about end of life. We recently put up a meme that said that everything that's said at funerals should be said at birthdays.
My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too. Hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. What's up, dollies? Are we dying or are we laughing today? Maybe both. Just got back from Santa Fe and Taos. Beautiful. I've been to Santa Fe, but not Taos. That was a very magical, mystical moment. There was a wine festival. I visited my friend Nicole. It is always good to get out of town. In other brief life updates, I have a lot of baby showers coming up. A lot of babies in town, out of town, all the babies, birth, life, death, and one of my friends whose mom died was asking me for ideas on how to honor her mom at a baby shower. So I do have ideas. Curious if anyone listening has done something like that. Definitely shoot me a message at Dying of Laughter Podcast on Instagram if you want to discuss further. Or if there's grief you want to share, new grief, old grief resurfacing, anticipatory grief, I always want to hear what you have to say. In lighter news, life updates, etc., I signed with Osbrink for voiceover, so that's exciting. It's a whole new chapter. There's a lot to learn. I do have some ideas of the ins and outs from podcasting world and from comedy worlds, but of course voiceover is its own category. So I started this class at Voice Masters that I'm looking forward to, or I had the first week. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. It's specifically improvisation for voiceover spots. So that's cool. And I'm also in this commercial on-camera class at ASG Studios. So just feeling a little classy this week. Classy, but not classy. Do you know what I'm saying? In grief news, I've joined the associate board of Our House Grief Support in Los Angeles. So the associate board are the quote unquote younger folk who have navigated grief or are navigating grief, but we're planning more of the events. There's a cool walk coming up. There's a book launch party. There's good things happening. I'm just happy to connect with more people in this space. I'm thinking about doing David Kessler's online grief training, if anyone's familiar with him as an author and a speaker. So those are some things bubbling around in my mind. And if you're in LA, I'm going to a comedy fundraiser for Experience Camps. Grief Sucks presents Dying to Laugh with Caitlin Riley, Luke Null, Irene too, David Brown, a lot of great folks. Caitlin Riley is so funny. The fact that she's coming is amazing. She lost her dad. Definitely look up her Instagram videos if you're not obsessed with her already. So that is on Wednesday, March 6th at 7:30 at the Dynasty Typewriter in Los Angeles. Hope to see you there. This week's episode is really powerful. It's incredible. I find it so incredible when a parent can talk about the loss of their son. I'm speaking with Dean Lambert today of the Love Always Project. We're talking about mental health in the military, losing your son to suicide 1 year after coming home. Dean leads the Love Always Project, which was created to promote discussion about end-of-life issues, providing expert information, and to encourage people to pre-plan and pay for their funeral as the ultimate act of love for those they will leave behind. Dean is a military brat who moved 18 times in 17 years, and today, as mentioned, we're discussing the loss of Dean's son, Adam. Adam served in Afghanistan and died by suicide a year after coming home at age 24. So trigger warning for these topics. If this feels like not a good time to listen, perhaps you can listen later or you can pass on this episode, and that's okay too. But I assure you, Dean is so open and generous with how he talks about mental health and how we can help those who might be in a similar situation. I learned so much from him. People just, I don't know, on podcasts, sometimes people just say I'm so grateful, but that really is how I feel. I feel really grateful to have learned of Dean's story and to hear of Adam's story. If you know someone in the military who has struggled with mental health or suicide, or you find this episode inspiring, please consider sharing this with a friend who could benefit. It helps small indie podcasts like mine continue on. So appreciated if you feel open to passing it on. All right, wishing everyone a good day because Yodo, you only die once. Dean, very excited to have you here today. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. So thank you for your time and for coming on the show.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely, Dean. So the first question I ask all of my guests right off the bat is about their goldfish moment. And this is the first time that you thought about or conceptualized death in some way, most specifically in childhood. Is there a moment from your early childhood that comes to mind when I say that? Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
Not so much about dying, but I do remember a vivid time We were living in West Springfield, Virginia, which makes me feel very close to Dave Grohl. If you're out there, Dave, we're homies. I, for some reason, started thinking about how old am I going to be in the year 2000? I was in second grade at the time. Ever since then, I did the math, took a few tries, but I realized that would be 36. And ever since then, I have had this unfortunate obsession with the passage of time. So, like now I'm about to turn 60. I know you're very surprised.
Congratulations. That is exciting.
Yes.
Hey, the alternative is you didn't. And then
I didn't know, but somebody says, hey, 30 years from now, what are we doing? I'm like, I ain't gonna be here 30 years from now. So I've always had this thing, and I don't know if it's the finality of death or just counting down, or I don't know what it is, but I've never thought about physically dying, but I have thought about ends and beginnings.
That's a good way to put it. I appreciate that. And I love that you were calculating that math when you were young. You're like, wait, how old am I going to be when? What's happening?
It took many fingers and toes.
Perfect. Love that. You have 36 fingers and toes. That's excellent. Can you share, Dean, a little bit more about the landscape of your childhood and your upbringing? I know we were talking off mic about it just a moment before,
Sure.
But can you tell listeners where you grew up and who you grew up with?
Okay. Well, my whole family's from Flushing, Queens, and my mom and dad lived on the same block. Never thought they would ever marry each other. They were enemies when they were growing up, and she actually got engaged to somebody who went on to be in the Attorney General's office in I think somewhere Manhattan, I think. And anyway, my dad went into the Air Force. He started writing to my mom from Japan, and when he moved to Germany, he wrote her a letter and said, "Come over and marry me," and she did. Because she was very, she kicked authority. And I think she just had a moment where she just wanted to run away. So they got married in Germany, and I grew up a military brat. I came back to the U.S. pretty quick and proceeded to be, bounce around every few years. My father was very nomadic. He just had this thing in him where he just wanted to do the next thing. And unfortunately, I have that too. But growing up, we just moved around a lot. So my whole thing is trying to figure out the landscape wherever I lived. I had a period there where I just would sit and watch and listen. And a lot of times I had to listen to the dialect or the language, whatever country or wherever I was in the US. And so at a certain point in time, just about as we were going to move, I was getting the lay of the land and got a few friends. So I'm really keen on, this is why I'm a marketing storyteller, is because I'm always, looking and trying to figure things out and making up stories in my head about how I'm going to fit in. So that was my growing up, is just moving all around for 18 years. And it was a blessing and it was a curse. I never got to put down roots. Growing up, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a town doc, somebody who was the town doctor. That didn't happen because of too much math and science in the MCATs. Went into broadcasting, started an ad agency, and then it led me to what I'm doing right now. And there's another part of that story that I didn't become a doctor, but I was enamored by another business. And that's kind of where I'm working right now.
Where are some of the places that you lived?
My most favorite place that I lived was Naples, Italy. And it was great. I went to 3 years of my high school there and some middle school, and just absolute beautiful place to live at the time that we lived there. I've been to Monterey, California 3 times. The Defense Language Institute has been there. And so wherever my father had to go, when he had to go to Vietnam, he had to learn how to speak French because he was in intelligence and they were dealing with, captured people and getting information. So French was their language because they were a French colony in Vietnam for so long. He speaks Russian. He had to learn to speak Russian. Of course, when we went to Italy, we had to speak Italian. And those were 6-month stints. So I loved Monterey, California. And I was there in lots of different eras, and I think my favorite was the 70s, because almost every movie you see about California, it's like the 70s are so cool, But I loved being there in the early 70s. We lived in Las Vegas for a while back in the days when casino, when the alternative businessmen owned everything, and that was a lot of fun. So, I've had a lot of favorite places. America is just, if you don't travel, you should, because there's just so much to see beyond your own life.
Very true. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think it's really interesting that you moved from Italy, you said, to Nebraska for your last year.
Off at Air Force Base, yeah.
So you've seen it all. I mean, I think that's really interesting. And like you said, I resonate with there's so much more beyond your own life. And people can sometimes lose sight of that. So thank you for your perspective. Before we get into all the wonderful businesses that you're working on, I know today we're honoring your child. I
Yes.
would love if you could share a little bit more about your story, and thank you for their service. I actually just came back from a military wedding. One of my best friends just married a pilot, and it's my first time speaking with so many people in the military at the engagement party and the wedding and all of that. So I have a newfound extreme respect for this entire world. But I just got back last night, and then knowing I was speaking to you, I was having a lot of thoughts this weekend. So I'd love to share the story of your child, and you
Sure.
could walk us through his experience in the military through the end of his life.
Yeah, so I'm the only one in my family that did not go into the military, and I don't have many regrets. I have been fortunate to do everything that I've said I wanted to do or I'm about to. And so I just don't want to, die saying I wish I would have, should have, could have, So Adam served in the my father was in the military, my brother was in the Navy SEALs. I mean, almost everybody in my family has somehow done that. And, I'm the odd man out, and that is a big regret of mine. Adam was influenced by my father and by a lot of his friends to go into the Marines. So he did. He was great. I mean, if you read things about him, cards that we got, we were really happy to have all of his friends come here. I mean, they're all relatively young people who don't have a lot of money. They piled into their cars from the East Coast and the West Coast, and it took them 24 hours to drive here. And so they all told stories about how he was hilarious under any conditions when he was in Afghanistan, and people, anytime somebody was down or feeling bad or whatever, they'd go talk to him, and he made them laugh and kind of gave them some kind of perspective that it's not all that bad. And so, he was an empath. And I think that he gave all that to everybody up and down the ranks. We got a letter from a captain in the Marines and a lieutenant colonel in the Marines that all said that he helped them out. You forget sometimes these people with upper ranks are still, in their 30s. They're young people and high achievers, and they've seen a lot. So even at his funeral, instead of just playing music in the background, we played Gaffigan. We played bits of Adam Sandler dialogue. He knew the dialogue from every movie, and it was annoying as hell, but that's what he did. In fact, on the last day of his life, that evening, we went out for July 4th, but he obviously didn't like what goes on during that celebration. We came home, we were watching an Adam Sandler movie, and he was like repeating the dialogue a little bit before, like it's out of phase. And it was late. I'm tired. And I'm like, all right, that's it. I'm going to bed. He just laughed it off, and the last kind of words he said were, "Good night, Dad. Love you." And he never says love you. He would just say good night or call me old man or whatever. And I thought of turning around at that moment because I was like, what's going on? But I didn't. It's one of those moments in life, right? Went to bed, and the next morning, that was the day that he died by suicide. He was in full dress uniform, had his dog tags around his hand. I mean, he planned that thing better than a military operation. And we found a diary. Turned out he had some, this is why people have guilt. It's like, how did I not see even before he went in the Marines that he was, struggling with things? He literally said he went to the Marines to die. And that explained a lot because he was promoted in the field. There were a lot of people that said that he did more than as a combat engineer. He would volunteer every time they were going forward to do some sort of, they thought there was somebody planning IEDs. And so he would go and he would be in the turret on the weapon, and he was pretty fearless about things. He did run towards danger, even, as a little kid. We have on his grave marker, "I'll hold my own hand," because he was like, we were walking him to kindergarten, first grade one day, going across the street, and my wife said, "Give me your hand, Adam, give me your hand." And he said, "No, I'll hold my own hand." So,
Wow.
it's like, that's kind of the way he was. So he was a bright, smart kid. It didn't matter where he was or what he did. He made immediate friends. We rode motorcycles together. He did Patriot Guard rides with me. And his funeral it went around the block several times. I mean, I had a guy who was moving to Oklahoma who was on our one of our television stations here as a investigative reporter. And he finally came in and pushed his way through using his media credentials and said, "I can't wait anymore. I've been in line for 2 hours." So it was huge.
Wow.
The other interesting thing is that And this is something I want people to know about funerals and memorials. And
Please.
I know Adam on his dog tags, he was very interested in Judaism. I'm Jewish. His mom's not.
Oh, I'm Jewish.
And yes. So he was very interested in Judaism. He found solace in the Torah, and he met rabbis and people, other Jewish people, and he was just fascinated and very enamored with it. It seemed complicated yet uncomplicated. You know how rabbis are. Ask them a question, they'll ask you more questions and ask what it means to you, right? It's very frustrating.
Yes.
But he got into that because it made him think.
Mhm.
Anyhow, so we knew that he wanted to be buried as a Jewish person, which means, as you know, 24 hours, no embalming, and all that. Well, we had all of his Marine friends say, we can't get there for at least 24 hours. And we want to see him. And being in the funeral, working with funeral homes, I know for a fact that, that's an important last memory, So then we had to decide, well, is that what Adam would have wanted? And you know what? He's gone. And so we decided we were going to have a private viewing with just the Marines. It was difficult because of his injury that he caused, but they did a spectacular job. And we had 21 to 22 young Marines, men, women, older Marines come in, and they had a private viewing. And it was one of the most special moments in the world. So sometimes you have to go a little bit against what the final wishes were. But the main point is that he did have final wishes. So, and we knew about them. Great kid. Love him, miss him. He's here every day. And there's not a day that goes by I don't think of him, because the Veterans Cemetery is less than a mile from here. And every time I get on or go off the interstate, I'm passing right by it.
Dean, this is you have an incredible way of speaking of your son, and I appreciate your optimism and enthusiasm here. And I'm sure, it is not Camesian. It's not this way every day, but the fact that you can share the story is extremely inspiring. And
well, thank you.
Thank you. And I also agree that, there's wishes, and and we're going to talk about that in a moment here about what people want. And yet with religion or spirituality or your wishes, there does have to be some, I don't know if wiggle room's the right word, but just readjusting based on the world and what's possible, like you said. So I'm also glad that you're giving permission to others to consider what makes the most sense. And my dad was very Jewish, but there were also things in modern life that are different. And my dad was paralyzed for over a decade, and he ultimately decided to be cremated, which is very not Jewish, but he was like, I don't have a relationship with my body the same way others do after a decade of not moving. And that's an interesting, caveat. So every situation, right, is very different. So
yeah. It definitely is. And I think that people need to understand that funerals and memorials are for the living. You don't have to ask yourself, am I doing what they wanted, if you talk about it before. And
Yes.
I'm saying before anybody has, God forbid, a terminal illness or any of that stuff. And I think the one thing I would definitely want to say is that you don't have to bring up or talk about death when you want to talk about end of life. We recently put up a meme that said that everything that is said at birthdays should be said at everything that's said at funerals, should be said at birthdays.
I love that.
And so what you're doing is not so much talking about death, but you're talking about life. Hey, Dad, Mom, I know you guys met when you were, you lived on the same block, but did you ever have another boyfriend or girlfriend before Mom? And how long was that? Or Dad, talk about your military career. Or Dad, what's your favorite food? Or what do you, these seem like little trivial things, but the more you ask these questions just in a casual setting, whether it's Pesach or whether it's Christmas or whatever it is, you're sitting in the car and you've got a half hour to drive, pop a question out there, because it'll get them and you thinking about, hey, those are good questions. I probably should, talk about my life more. And B, it makes it so much easier if no plans are left and you want to know how to commemorate this person's life, and it gives you those stories. So that's what, that's kind of what my passion is getting people talking about life, so that when the end of life happens, or when it becomes apparent, whether it's ALS or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, that people are losing the ability to tell their stories, that you get that as much as you can.
When you think of end of life planning, what comes up for you? Have you thought about what your own funeral would look like, how your loved one would like to be remembered? Lantern is a website created by young people who have themselves lost parents. It's a platform to create your end-of-life plan easily online and for free. Their site even shares, why do we know how hard the end-of-life and death process can be? We've been there, and we were totally unprepared. Lantern began in the fall of 2018 with one sentence: I think we need to do something about death. The founder of Lantern, Liz Eddy, has actually been a guest on this podcast. You can even Google Liz Eddy dying of laughter to hear the full story as to how she started Lantern and why. It started with having lost her dad as a young child in elementary school, and how her family was tasked with all of the planning that ensued after her dad died. They've since built out an awesome team and developed Lantern as the public benefit corporation that it is today. So what you do is you sign up, you can create a plan. There's a free and paid option. And you can talk about planning ahead, managing a death, writing down all of your or your loved one's wishes, how they see themselves going, what they'd like to do, who should manage their social media, what are their account passwords, how can you make the transition just a little bit easier. Their website also has workshops and guides and additional resources on how to find a funeral home, life insurance 101, sympathy gifts, etc. I can't recommend this platform more. And I'll be offering a discount for your first time using Lantern. And I'll put that link in the show notes. So head over to lantern.co to learn more, or click the link in my show notes for this episode to save a little bit of money. And you know we love doing that if you would like to make a plan using a paid option to have the most thorough, responsible, and organized end-of-life plan possible. And now let's pop back over to the episode. I'm in complete awe of what you're doing so regularly in this space. And I think it's extremely important. And I myself had a funeral themed birthday for my 30th birthday. So I'm with you 100% in just, making it normal to discuss these things. So I want to talk all about that. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions here, and then let's go into the Love Always Project. So with regards to the military, Dean, I'm from the West Coast, and most of my friends growing up had never met anyone in the military. And I told you just now, one of my best friends is now married in to the military, and all of us are learning so much. And it might seem naive, but there are a lot of people who don't come into contact with those in the military. And I just want to, break a few of these things down while you're here. And if you could talk about what is every civilian's biggest misconception about the military? Is there something that you see when you meet new folks who have preconceived notions about what the military entails?
Yeah, I mean, it's a small percentage of the population that actually volunteers. We have an all volunteers force. And I think the biggest conception is that all people in the military are militarized, so to speak. Not everyone in the military has a job that involves weaponry or things like that. My father retired from the Air Force in 1981. He is currently the oldest serving civilian public affairs officer at an Air Force base. He's 82 years old.
Wow.
And so he's always been in intelligence and public affairs. Yes, when he was in Vietnam, he had a sidearm and a rifle. Yes, Adam was in the Marines, and in the Marines, every Marine is a rifleman or a rifle person. But in the Navy, in the Air Force, in the Coast Guard, and the Space Force, there are a lot of technology people. There are a lot of logistical and administrative people. There are accountants. If you go to the U.S. Air Force Academy, you can major in business. And it's because, despite what we might think of how the government runs the military as a business and what they pay for every screw and every hammer or screwdriver, it takes all kinds, to quote Miranda Lambert. And so that's what I think people would be interested to know about the military, is that it's a very good career, especially if you want to get into the sciences and things like that. There have been a lot of folks who've gone to military academies and become doctors. So it's not all about all of the things you hear about on social media and in the media now about, going in and changing the world into a democracy. It's running the show and being a doctor or a corpsman or whatever it is. So that is a big misconception, I think.
Thank you for talking about that. I was sitting next to I was a bridesmaid, and the groomsman I was next to was a submarine officer, was telling me all about submarines. And I had just I've just learned so much about what it's like being underwater for that many months or years. It was fascinating. And just because my friend's husband is a pilot, I was mostly speaking with pilots. And then I was like, oh, right, there are so many other things, including
See,
what
you're
you're
not
saying.
supposed to scuba dive and then fly right away. So is there a rule? Like, did you have to wait 24 hours to talk to the submariner and then the pilot?
Exactly.
Because the bends, you could drink a lot, but then the bends are worse.
Exactly. Dean, how do you think we should be addressing mental health in our country? As your son died by suicide, I know that is a complex kind of loss. I wonder what comes up for you when you tell people about the way your son died.
I think the thing is that it's stigmatized. I know that it's all over, the social media now and the news, and everybody's rallying around Mental Health Awareness Month and PTSD Awareness Month. We have to remember that every single one of us is made up of different experiences and everything else. And genetically, we're all different. This is why cancer has been so difficult to cure. My mom died. She was a smoker back in 1987. And then I, stop at a stoplight and look over, and there's a lady 90 years old smoking in her car with her windows rolled up. And you're like, how does that happen? Well, it's just like mental health and the brain and everything else. Everybody is different. So while we want to talk about it and make people aware of it, it's so individualized. If it's a chemical imbalance and it's actually something physical that a physician can, go in and do some sort of electrical stimulation, that's one thing. But then you've got the whole experience. How do people treat folks when they are growing up? How does that affect every single day, moment, year of their life to manifest what ends up happening, whether it's suicide or whether it's, God forbid, for your 18th birthday, going out and buying an AR-15 and killing children, or just being in your room and not being able to move or talk to anybody or eat, right? They're not always outward aggression. Sometimes it's inward aggression, okay, which is usually how suicide results. So my thing about mental health is just understand that it is different for everybody because we're biologically and experientially different. And I'm not an expert, okay? I'm just a storyteller here. And my own experience was I knew Adam was struggling. Our two daughters had their poop in the group, except for, their normal growing up stuff. Adam ticked differently. And we didn't attribute it to mental health. We attributed it to, he doesn't like school or, whatever it was. But he was so funny and he had so many friends. It's like, there's nothing wrong with this kid. It's just whatever. And he planned everything, So be aware of it, watch for the signs, and I guess don't be afraid to ask the questions. I'd rather get socked in the eye and ask the question than never ask the question and get poked in the heart. You know what I'm saying? So, that is all I can say about it. It's just so individual that I would be afraid to go into anything except for how my influence is, because I could go one way and somebody would think that's full of it. That's not my experience. It's so individual.
Right. Very well said, Dean. And because of the way that you can articulate yourself with regards to this loss, I'm wondering, how does this come up for you in your daily life? When people ask you if you have kids, do you bring up Adam? Do you talk about this at the dinner table, at parties? You're very open and candid.
Sure.
How does that come up for you in your day-to-day life?
Well, it all depends on, how it comes up. And I guess what I'm going to answer this in a way so that anybody who's listening has permission to believe that there's just no way to do it the right way. And it's always awkward. I don't care how many years. It's been 7 years this year, July 4th, anywhere from May 30th, which is his birthday and Memorial Day, to about July 6th is just, the weather better be good. And I better be able to get out on a motorcycle because I need that wind therapy. But I would say this, if it's people we feel more acquainted with, or it's a friend of a friend, we'll say if somebody says how many kids you have. Sometimes I've said I have 2 daughters and a son that passed away. And the son that passed away comes out really quick, just in case they misunderstood me and then they don't want to ask or whatever. If I'm, on a Patriot Guard ride, or if I'm, in an area where I know there's military, it's a little easier to talk. We have 2 daughters. My son was in the Marines and, he passed after he came back from Afghanistan. We still go to restaurants. My daughters live on the East Coast now, one in DC and one in Boston. And so when we're with them and have the chance to go out to dinner, the goofiest thing is to ask for a table for 4 instead of 5 or 6. They talk about the empty chair at the table, and that's the hardest part, is when you're just going through life. And I'm telling you, there's just, I don't know how many years have to go by before you just feel comfortable saying it. And then if you do say we had a son that passed away, you're like, oh man, did I just bum this new acquaintance out? Because they always get a look on their face like, oh, I'm sorry. And it's really that they weren't there when it happened. I wasn't even there when it happened. So,
Right.
and so it's not like it was a car accident or whatever. He did it to himself. So I just would, the answer I have is it just depends on the situation and it depends on the person who's lost the individual. There's no right answer and you never get used to it.
I agree. There's no right answer, but I feel that the answer you just gave is the closest you can come to a right answer, which is leading with honesty and saying how you do it. And sometimes you say different things to different people. So, or not. I like how you're saying it. And it's,
if you're having a particularly bad day or you're at a birthday party or you're whatever, you just don't want to get into it. We go to football games or sporting events and, my wife is born and raised Husker Red. She came from Nebraska, and so we'll go to a game, whether it's our stadium or the host stadium. And she strikes up the conversation because she's a sports nut and she knows everything about Nebraska football and, lots of sports. And so for her, once you start talking, then you start asking the person who's sitting next to you or behind you a little bit of personally, like when there's a lull in the game or halftime or whatever. Oh, so where are you from? Do you guys have kids? Well, again, it's a situation of whether you want to bring up that you had a child that passed away when they asked about kids or whatever. I mean, I do know that when people ask, oh, is your mom still alive or are your parents still alive? Because when you get to be a certain age, they ask that. And Chelsea, you've had a personal experience where, it happened all too soon. So what do you say? Yeah, my mom died in 87, because you don't want to get into it, right? Especially when the parent was in an accident or had an illness or something like in your case. So just deal with each situation as they come, be proud or quiet or whatever the situation is.
Absolutely agree. And I agree that it depends on the situation or, sometimes someone's like, oh, where are your parents from? And I just say New York and, then they're like, oh, where's your, but then there's always that one comedic moment where someone keeps asking and I don't really feel like it. I'm like, oh yeah, my dad or whatever they ask. Yeah, he's from Long Beach, blah, blah, blah. Oh, so what does he do? Oh, this, yeah, he was a lawyer. And then I'm like, now I've gone too far and it totally seems like he's alive. And I'm like,
right.
Well,
Because then you use the word was.
Not,
the minute you transfer from present tense to past tense, then you're screwed.
Right. It's like I should have just gone from the beginning, but I was trying to spare them. And now I'm totally acting like he's been around. He hasn't been around for over 10 years. And I'm like, no, I'm being weird. So you have to laugh about that stuff. So Dean, I think one question that may come up for people listening to an episode that does address the military is, how do you feel that we're protecting our vets when they do come back? This can be a controversial topic and there's not a right answer here, but do you wish there were more programs in place for counselors or mental health for when people came back? Have you had any conversations with military about the loss of your son? What comes up for you around this?
Yeah, I will say that I think there's one important thing that everybody has to remember, and that is that the people who are serving our veterans at VA hospitals or funded or unfunded organizations that cater to military personnel, especially after they get out of the military, whether it's PTSD or whether it's a physical injury or whatever it is, they are people who are dealing with incredible, profound life experiences for these veterans. Okay. And they're doing the best that they can. So I would shout out to any person who is dedicating their career in life to helping veterans. It's a mission and it's a passion and they're under-resourced, obviously. So you got to say that first. The government could always do more for a lot of people. When in the insurance business, they talk about underinsured or underserved communities. In sociology, we talked about underserved and underrepresented. I would say, generally speaking, sometimes I question priorities. Veterans are certainly a cohort who could use a lot more support. But there are children starving and there are conflicts in America that either relate to mental health or whatever. So you just sort of kind of do whatever you can to understand and listen, and financial support, volunteer support whenever you can. I just think that right now things aren't set up for us to have the right kinds of conversations in the government that are productive. And it's just because, if you're for veterans, you're all the way for veterans and you want to win. So you're not going to listen to somebody who says, yeah, but what about this? And so I just don't think the environment is right for us to help all the people in America who need help. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be helping people not in America. My old country's in Ukraine. You keep hearing about Lviv. It used to be called Lemberg, which is my actual last name. Long story behind that, but obviously would support what's going on over there. There's only so much to go around, no matter how much you say that we're printing money. And so we each individually do what we can. And I know in the Jewish faith and others, there's a lot more selflessness that is dictated in our various books. And I think that I hope that people would exhibit that a little bit more, even if you're not religious.
Dean, I really, really appreciate what you just said. I think just it's beautiful, and I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to share this with my friend Wendy, who's the bride. She's currently in grad school to become a therapist specifically for those with PTSD who come back from the war. So I know she'll appreciate this episode. Hi, Wendy. She just got married. Okay. And it's because of, her husband and all the people she's meeting and the conversations. But I really appreciate the way that you talk about this. I could see you being I don't know. You already are a spokesperson and do all this. I could see you being a spokesperson.
No more school for me.
For this topic specifically. Yeah, you would be, I feel like you could do a commercial and like talk to people about this. But hey, that's what you're doing. You're spreading your message through all the things you do, which brings me to the Love Always Project, a movement created to promote discussion about end-of-life issues. I would love for you to share with listeners in your own words about what you're doing with this organization.
Sure. Well, I have for the past 30 years worked closely with funeral homes. And the reason why is because when I had my little ad agency in Lincoln, Nebraska, many years ago, we got a phone call from a person who got a referral, and he was a manager of a funeral home. And they weren't happy with how they were marketing and what people thought of funeral directors and things. So fast forward, we met with them and we helped them with their communications and their marketing to kind of throw back the curtains a little bit on the Wizard of Oz, so everybody could see what it was about and what they really did, and that it wasn't mysterious, and open dialogue. When you have that, there's trust. But as I got used to being around the funeral home and stuff, I thought, oh my gosh, remember I told you I want to be a doctor. I want to be a town doctor, right? Well, the funeral director, the owner of the funeral home, was very much just like that. He had roots. He was a pillar of the community. He was a community contributor. He was involved in everything. There was a little bit of medical stuff with embalming and restorative arts, but mainly it was ministering to a community. And so that's how I got so enamored with funeral homes. I actually got discouraged from becoming a funeral director, and they said, why don't you do this for funeral homes? That way you're close to the business, and we need this. Fast forward, I don't know, to 1998 from 1991. And this company that actually writes me a paycheck is a company that works with thousands of funeral homes to help them with pre-planning programs. Okay. And a lot of times when people prearrange, it's triggered by a recent funeral that they've had to plan, or a friend died and they went to a funeral, and then they're like, wow, and of course it's a certain age when this all comes together and you're like, I should do this. And so I'm like, well, that's kind of too late, because even whether you're planning in advance or you're planning like we had to with Adam, I don't care how much when your brain clicks off because you've had a grief event or you've attended a funeral, you can't make decisions. You can't. And I knew it really hit me that Adam died about 3/4 of the way through planning the funeral, when they started asking us about things that I was forgetting. Being in the business for 25 years at the time, I was like, how could I not know this? Both my wife and I work in this business, and you just are paralyzed in the brain. You just absolutely can't make just decisions. Doesn't matter. So I said, we need to do more than just what funeral homes can do to communicate to people how important it is to get to know your family and friends while they're alive, so that even if only you can use that from healing, or you can talk about that friend in a meaningful way, or a family member, then great. But if you can use it for yourself and say, hey, mom, dad, we just had a great, holiday together. And it was just a great time and such a great memory. It gets me thinking about, when you guys aren't here, or God forbid something happens to me, do you have any plans in place? I mean, is there something you want us to know, to make sure and say, on your behalf at your funeral? What is it that you want people to know about your life? Help me out. And then that leads to some of the more, logistical questions, well, where do you want to be married? I know my dad wants to go to Arlington. I know that. I knew Adam wanted a military burial. He communicated those two things to us. There are ways to talk about it. And so that's what the Love Always Project is all about, is to encourage people to have discussions, it may not be easier, but it becomes less weird. It's just something that we talk about, and talking about the end of life doesn't have to mean talking about when you're going to die, if you're going to die, or death. A lot of folks don't talk about that because they're afraid it's going to happen, right? There are a lot of cultures that believe if you take their picture, that it steals their spirit away. Indigenous people in the US and in Australia used to don't take my picture. That's why they didn't smile. They didn't want their personality to come out and be stolen away. Well, it's kind of like with death. If I talk about it, it's going to happen. It predestines me. And so those are things that I think
it will happen to all of us. So, they're not fully wrong. It will happen. So they are correct in a sense.
Yep. And your podcast, and there's so many other people who are out there helping people understand that talking about these things is right and good and therapeutic, because then it's not, to use a technical term, icky.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy for everybody. Some people have different relationships with their friends and family, and they'll never have those kinds of discussions. And then I would say, just pay attention then. Do it internally.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm so happy to learn of what you're doing and to bring these conversations forward, because there are, like you said, there are many people who have these agendas, but there are many, many people who do not. And until there's someone in every single small community in the world to talk about it with their friends and families in smaller circles, there's always so much more work to be done. I mean, even when I started the podcast, it started 2 years ago. I started planning it 3 years ago, and I started volunteering with grieving kids many years before that. It's just been a part of my life for such a long time. And certainly when I was 4 and my parents told me my dad had this illness, I've been thinking about it ever since. One of the biggest questions I got is, how are you going to get people every week who have lost someone? And I even did this class, and they were saying, maybe you should change it because, it's hard to find guests as it is. And I even doubted myself. I go, well, I know a handful, and I'll start with them and I'll see. Dean, I've never run out of guests. There's so many people that have lost someone, and many times we don't even know who they are because they're in our own communities and they haven't even told us. I've met friends who have said, so yeah, I see you're doing the podcast. I actually had a sister once. I'm like, but I've known you for years. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And isn't it a shame that it takes something like this to get somebody to finally talk about something that they've probably been struggling with for years and years and years. And that struggle has become such a part of their life that they kind of don't notice it. And so what we've done on our website is we have a forum. All we need is your email address. You go there, you join the movement. We're not selling anything. We never are going to sell anything.
Yeah. What's on the forum? I'm so curious.
Well, if you go to lovealwaysproject.org and you go to community and you click on the forum, we have 4 different sections right now, and they all match up kind of with the top subject matters of the blog that we have. And so basically our community manager and I will throw something up there one day. I was watching the biography of Thomas Jefferson. My wife's traveling and there wasn't anything else on. So, but it's fascinating. His life and the things that he stood for is very appropriate to stuff that's going on right now. Like, he thought the Constitution should be rewritten every 20 years. So
didn't they just take out his memorial in New York? They took down his statue.
I'm not sure if they did that. Monticello's still around, so that's good. But the funny thing is he said something about what's the use of grief, because he had a lot of tragedy in his life. So I popped that up there. I said, hey, Thomas Jefferson said this, what's the use of grief? And so, we're just kind of starting out here. It's only been a couple of months. So what we want to do is we want to have people just sort of talk about that, and that we have some experts out there that'll pop in. We're watching all the time, and we just want to make it so that people feel like they have a place that they can talk about their experiences, whether they're an expert or not, whether they have a question, and just foster this sort of grassroots communication. We've got social up, and we have a lot of likes and a lot of shares. I think people are still a little wary about following But again, through conversation, you feel a lot more comfortable with having something like this pop up in notifications and things like that. And certainly you can always opt out. But it's very important what you're doing. And hopefully the Love Always Project is something that can fit into this sort of environment where maybe hear a podcast or they hear something on, aging or how to talk to your parents about their final wishes. And they find the Love Always Project if we do our SEO job right, and they can go out and share kibitz.
Absolutely. No, it's incredible. Everything looks wonderful, and congrats on well, you've been doing this for a long time, but having these new blogs and discussions is lovely. Everything looks great. I think that's a big part of the behind the scenes that I'm familiar with. It's like,
yes,
you have these great ideas, but then the execution, and then you have to get the PDF and the website and then the handle, and then,
Absolutely.
all the SEO. It's a lot. It's a lot. So
it's a lot. It's not like TikTok.
TikTok is a whole other beast. There's so much to this. Dean, I wanted to ask you about one of your talking points mentioned consumer attitudes as well as the opinions and beliefs about funeral pre-planning, including research data. Can you talk about that? I would love to hear more.
I can. So the company that writes my check is actually a company that provides funding for prearranged funerals. And we're owned by those people, the policy owners. The company started as a fraternal organization years ago where there weren't a lot of resources. So you put a little money into this group. And then when a person in the group dies, then the money's used to help pay for their funeral. And that's evolved into insurance. And again, I kind of hate bringing that up because, we're a separate from the company, but the insurance company feels that more people need to know about it, not so much because obviously it can create more policies, but we know that we will raise the whole tide. There are other companies that do what we do, and we're not going to necessarily do business with all of them because we don't do business with all the funeral homes. But the more people that think about it, the better it is for families, for consumers. So that's why we're investing our time, energy, and pretty much 70% of my time is it. But I'll just tell you, we survey every couple of years, 1 month from when somebody actually plans and funds a funeral. And we have a lot of statistics. So the one statistic that's most important is that most people know or have heard about prearranging somehow through somebody who did it or whatever. But it takes almost 2 years for something to happen to make them think, I got to do it for myself. And that research says that, the majority of those people attended a funeral recently. And that's the trigger. Okay. So we ask about their satisfaction. 100% of the people who prearrange their funerals are satisfied. There's completely satisfied, very well satisfied, and fairly well satisfied. There's no not satisfied. And the the two top ones make up over 80%.
Wait, I wanted just to clarify that. So wait, you're saying people who do prearrange their own funerals all put on the survey results that they're extremely satisfied.
They are either completely, very, or fairly well satisfied.
Okay, got it.
Nobody says, I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Right.
98% of people who prearrange have recommended it or say they're going to recommend it within a month of doing it.
Wow.
If you're a business person and you have 100% satisfaction and 98% recommendability, that's out of this world.
Right.
That's crazy.
Stellar data.
Yeah. About 30% of the prearrangers say that the most difficult part of prearranging was figuring out how to get started. Like, where do I go? They don't even know that a funeral home is a place to go. A lot of people go to their financial planners. A lot of them, go to their insurance salespeople. They just don't know how to go about it. And I think it's really sad. As long as American funeral directing has been around hundreds of years, at least 200, 300 years, people still don't think about the funeral profession. And it's not because they have a bad rap. We also look at surveys that are done, and most people respect funeral directors. There's still just a little bit of mystery. And so when there's mystery, there's a little bit of lack of trust. Not like you're going to get ripped off, but I just don't know you that well.
Right.
So it's not top of mind,
Right. And death itself is a bit mysterious, just regardless of what you know or believe, right?
Right. And then 75% of the people who are most likely to prearrange, we do focus groups and things. And when people hear about it, they think it's a good idea. But 75% of the people who look like those people who prearrange, whether it's your economic strata, whether it's your education level, whether it's where you live in the country, how old you are, 75% of the people who might do it don't even know it's available. And I have been on airplanes and I've been on motorcycle trips and I've been on vacations. And when it comes up to what do you do, Dean? And I say, well, I work with funeral homes, specifically in the advanced funeral planning area. Nobody has ever said, why would anybody want to do that? They all say, what do you mean? And I'll tell them a little bit more and they'll go, oh my gosh, I didn't even know you could do that. That's a great deal. Why doesn't everybody do that? I'm like, yeah, good question. And it's not even an economic thing. Most of the folks that prearrange feel that it's a good and smart thing to do and that it is the right thing to do for their families. It's sort of a responsibility checklist. And then a majority of them say that they did it so that they could remove the emotional and financial burden off of the funeral. And so I translate that to, I want people to think about my life and remembering me and telling funny stories or whatever they want to say upon my death, rather than figuring out all of the things you got to figure out. I mean, I didn't want to do Adam's funeral, but when I did, despite the fact that I have watched many arrangements, I've been involved in planning, for when somebody dies and things like that. But when you have to do it, your mind just goes blank. You just can't think of everything. And you don't know what you don't know when you're dealing with a death of a family member or somebody close, which I think you probably can acknowledge.
Right. Well, thank you, Dean. That's very helpful to hear. And it is interesting to be reminded of some of the data that you just shared. Is pretty incredible. Dean, for those who have not given thought to their own death or their own funeral, what are a few things that people can start to think about today? Something that I would think of is whether you want to be buried or cremated, for instance, or
Right.
do you want your ashes spread at a tree or in the ocean or your childhood home? Are there a few things that are most common or most likely for people to struggle with coming to a decision?
Good question. That's where I think a lot of people go, and what makes them not want to think about it is the cremation or burial, right?
Right. Did I just jump into like the most intense one? Maybe there's
It's pretty intense because
Right.
people think cremation is the cheapest, fastest way. And it isn't anymore. Not if you want to have an experience that you don't want to feel guilty about or wonder if you did the right thing. And it's, quote, it's so final. You have a lot of options with memorialization and cremation. I'm wearing a little necklace here with Adam in it,
Wow. Can you talk about some of those options?
Sure. I mean, you could do anything from sending cremated remains into space to putting them on an ocean reef to wearing them in a little necklace, putting them in a bracelet. My daughter went on her birthright trip and then ended up being in Israel for 3 years and meeting her fiance, who she's getting married in October, over in Israel.
Oh my gosh. Wait, congratulations. I have to interject. I met my boyfriend on birthright in Israel.
Did you?
We didn't live there, but 7 years ago. And so,
Yeah.
oh
Well,
my gosh, amazing. Mazel tov. That's
that-
incredible.
Well, they got their money's worth then, because that's
Yeah.
exactly what they want. So when I visited her, when she first went there, she actually went to the Western Wall and took his picture and put a little thing of his cremated remains at the Western Wall. So that's the thing that makes cremation such a wonderful thing. But there are still people who want to have a more permanent place, to be with a legacy of their family. And that's where, you would want to you could be buried. Now, Adam was cremated and buried at the Veterans Cemetery. We just happened to hold on to some of his cremated remains. And so there's lots of options. And again, talking about this makes it a lot easier for you to move from the how do I celebrate to how do I do this logistically and technically, cremation, burial, all that stuff. But the one thing you asked the question, how does somebody start thinking about it, right? I would say the best thing to start thinking about is, what music do you want to be played at your funeral? Like, I have on my phone a funeral playlist. And, Adam didn't leave a funeral playlist, but when people came into the funeral home to pay their respects, they paused for a minute and looked up at the speakers, and they heard Jim Gaffigan or Sarah Silverman or whoever. And they're like, what's that laughing? And then they're like, yep, Adam's funeral. Of course he's going to have comedy, and, we played some of his favorite songs and things like that. But I think that a lot of people think they have to start thinking about the mechanics around their end of life, when really you should start thinking about the celebration side. It makes it a lot easier. Oh yeah, I want that Foo Fighters song played. Or, oh yeah, I was with so-and-so, my first date song, like my wife and I thought Lionel Richie could make us fall in love back when I was wooing her. Like, if Lionel Richie can't make a girl fall in love with you, nobody can. It's not meant to be. So, we're definitely going to play a Lionel Richie song, right? Not, Hello Again. We're going to play All Night Long, right? Something like that. So I think the easier things, what are some things you want to make sure that happen when you die, that will make people think about you, for better or for worse? That's kind of what I would do. And there are a lot of movies and shows out there right now that are amazing to watch and hear. There was a show, and I forget what it's called now. It had Shirley MacLaine and who's the actress, big giant eyes. Anyway, but it was
Someone
about Shirley.
Fabulous. Okay.
What's that?
Do you know what it is called? I can look it up right now.
Yeah, no, I don't know what it's called.
Okay.
That's why I'm.
Great.
It's about Shirley MacLaine plays this old ad agency newspaper lady, and she's a hermit, and her husband died, and nobody talks to her anymore. But
the last word.
Okay. And
the power of Google.
Yes, she calls up the newspaper and says, "I want to place an obituary, mine." And so she's the intern at the newspaper working in obituaries, and so she befriends after a long time this curmudgeon-y
Amanda Seyfried.
Yes, there.
Okay, great.
I knew it was an A.
Okay.
So anyway, so that's a movie that you could watch, and it's funny and it's sad and everything else, but it's kind of like, okay, well, what do I want to do? There's another movie with Robert Duvall called Get Low, and it's got Dan Aykroyd in it and a couple other famous actors. And it's about a guy in the 30s who also happened to be a hermit. He had something happen in his life. He moved into the mountains, and he shows up at the church in town one day, and he goes to the pastor and he plumps down this ball of money and says, I want to plan my funeral right now. And the pastor says, well, I don't do that stuff. You donate the money to the church or whatever. He says, I'm not doing that. I'm not giving that to you. So he ends up talking to the funeral director in town, who goes up to his shack and says, I'll do whatever you want. And it talks about the reason why he wanted to have this funeral before he died is because he knew people were talking about him, but he wanted to give them a chance to talk about it so he could hear it. Another great movie about end of life you would think would be depressing, but no, it's not. And it's instructive in a way. So just think about it. Think about your songs that you want played in your funeral. What does it mean? You don't even have to say funeral playlist. You could just say my favorite songs, and then tell other people about it.
Dean, I love this.
Yeah, it's too hard to talk about when I die, I want to be buried here. I want to be cremated and throw me in a cardboard box. People say that all the time. That's a defense mechanism. They don't want to talk about it. So, well, no, I just, if it falls to me, I want to make sure and know that I'm making the right decisions for you and also for, our family. And then they're like, okay, you're serious about this. Grab a beer. Let's have a talk, or whatever, a bourbon.
Yes. Or a water or a lemonade or whatever suits their fancy. Okay. I think that's a really interesting way to start those conversations, because, I always think of being buried and cremated as the first thing. And like you're saying, what about music? That is a excellent segue, I think, into starting that conversation. So thank you for that recommendation, along with plugging The Last Word, which I'm shocked I haven't seen. So I'm going to list that as a rec at the end of this episode.
And Shirley MacLaine is just amazing no matter what. So.
Right. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to see it. I might even watch it tonight. So watch out. I love these kinds of conversations. Dean, because you mentioned Adam was very comedic and loved to make people laugh, and because it is the Dying of Laughter podcast, I ask everyone, is there a comedic moment regarding your loss, your funeral planning, and if not comedic, something that was so bizarre or unfortunate or out of place that you just had to laugh?
My youngest daughter is going to just disinvite me to the wedding. I mean, she'll take the money, but I won't be able to go. I have to say that. So Adam left his diary. I'm getting dizzy telling this. All right. He left this book, and he talked about, his experience, but then he wrote something to each of us. And to my youngest daughter, who is an amazing, smart, accomplished, great husband picker, he said to her, try not to be such a princess. And she hated that. And, the whole thing about Jewish American princess, right? So Probably not politically correct to say that these days, but, Annie was the prom queen, and she was in dance and all that. And, and so she likes the finer things, occasionally we have a nickname for her. It's room service.
Amazing.
Anyway,
Amazing.
I love her. She's great. And she is tough. I mean, she is tough, but Adam just wanted her to stay humble. And I just thought, here we were reading all of this and the pictures he drew of Afghanistan and talking about all the things he did and, apologizing to his mother and saying what a great dad I was, and to his oldest sister, how supportive she was and how smart she is. And to Annie, it's like, he said a couple nice things to her. He says, but try not to be such a princess. And it just made us laugh. Except for Annie, it didn't make her laugh. She laughs now.
To her specifically? Were these notes that he said as
in his diary? He had a leather bound book, and we found it under his bed, and we're like, oh wow! And we started going through it, and he left that there for us. And so there was stuff. There was the story of I joined the Marines to die, and but I didn't think it was going to affect me as much. This is what this is. He drew pictures and all kinds of things, and then he said he wrote something to his mom and to me and my oldest daughter and to my youngest daughter, which I thought was, in his state of mind, he was probably so calm, but I think he knew we would laugh at that. And I think he knew that eventually Annie would. And in fact, he was going to go on birthright after he got out of the Marines. And he was so impactful and influential on his youngest sister that Annie did go. And, mom has to be Jewish for you to be Jewish and have Jewish babies. And she went to Israel, had a bat mitzvah. She went back for a fellowship. She lived there for a year after meeting her fiance, who's from New Jersey. And she converted. And she did all the right things. She made Aliyah. So, I mean,
wow.
So he inspired her to do that. And I think Adam would have followed through on that either. It would have made my wife happy. It would have been 3 against 1, but
Oh my goodness. Well, that's interesting. I could talk to you about Judaism for a whole other hour. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Did you consider your kids not to be Jewish because their mom
No.
wasn't? I feel like the modern way is anyone Jewish, you're Jewish, but I know the traditional way is not. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, she knew that if she wanted to marry a Jewish man and somebody whose family, is conservative, so it's not like he's Orthodox, but she knew that if for her to have Jewish babies, she would need to convert to Judaism. And that's a personal choice for everybody. I tend to believe, she was 20 something years old. It was her choice. And that's what she wanted to do. I'm proud that she committed to that.
Yeah.
But they were growing up in the Midwest. And I don't think my wife had ever met a Jewish person when she met me. In fact, there were girls in her, some college friends who thought it was a cult or something like that.
No
it's amazing
way.
what some people in the country just don't know because they don't know. I would never bash somebody for their, lack of knowledge.
Sure.
But I just always tell them it's just book 1, it's just the first book. That's all, after the other stuff, that's what we believe in. I just think that we didn't discourage them. I remember my oldest coming back. We kind of alternated a little bit between church and synagogue, probably went to church more.
Mm-hmm.
So we got the kids involved in Sunday school to get them out of the house. Did I just say that?
Right.
Anyway, second grade, Mackenzie comes home, my oldest daughter, and she says, Dad, did you know that the Jews killed Jesus? And I was like, well, first of all, I wasn't even there. Because that's what I always used to tell my mom whenever I wasn't there. I wasn't even. So I kind of said that. She didn't understand the history or the context. But it's funny because the teacher, I asked him afterwards, how did that come up? He says, well, we were talking about different religions. And he was talking about how some people believe this, but back in the day, the Jews were the judges and the Romans were this. And he went through and all she keyed on was that the Jews killed Jesus. So I had to set her straight and tell her, well, there was, there's a lot of violence. That was a long time ago. And if you're more interested, then let's find out, more. All about education. So
right. Well, no, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like, everyone has their misconceptions and preconceived notions. Like even myself, I didn't expect when you said you live in Des Moines for you to say later you're Jewish. I was like, oh, I don't think of Jewish people being there. But of course they're everywhere.
There are 2,900 of us.
Wow. Do people to this day ask you questions about your Judaism that are ever off-putting, or like, do you still find people?
Not at all.
Okay.
No, I mean, there are some people who in the Midwest, there's just such a predominance of Christianity.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, there's the stereotypes of different kinds of folks. And these days, people get very easily offended. So they're either totally insensitive to offense, or they're unaware of it. And, they're like, what? I mean, there's an old way of saying negotiating that one of the grandparents on my wife's side of the family used to talk about all the time. When people are being malicious, when they're trying to give you crap, and when they're not, or they're uneducated. And if we had a little bit more about that in the world, I think it would be a much better place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel lucky to be in Los Angeles with so many different kinds of people. But even myself, we all have so much more to learn.
With so much information available electronically these days, good, bad, or indifferent, folks should absorb everything. Listen to stuff that might make you uncomfortable.
I agree. Yes.
All of that, because the thing about it is, even if you look, the best way that you should look at educating yourself is so you could be a better person in the world. Yes. And that you have more to offer, in terms of, I just learned this, and here's how I thought about it before, and here's how I think about it now. That's why, even with, getting back to talking about end of life, it's not controversial. It's not political. It's personal preference and personal experience. So yes. Let's talk about it.
Yes, Dean, thank you for bringing it back. I completely agree. Dean, I end my conversations about birth. So we start about death, we end on birth. So when is your birthday, and what is a celebration or memory that you have around your own birthday?
My birthday is January 7th, and I'm proud to say I was born in 1963, last century.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was a very good year. Just before the Mustang came out, but it was still a good year. I'll just tell you one of my favorite memories of a birthday. It was, I don't remember how old I was, but it was when the tradition started in San Francisco, California, at Fisherman's Wharf. My parents first took me out for my first lobster dinner on my birthday. And every year I try and have lobster on my birthday.
I love that. Incredible. And Dean, you've gave us some recommendations here for The Last Word and so forth. Is there another book, film, or podcast that comes to mind with regards to grief, or that brings you joy or understanding in your own life?
There's just so many out there. I honestly have to say that I like sad movies. There's a lot of meaning in them. It helps you connect with and remember. It gives you an excuse to remember people in your life who have come and gone, and to translate the film experience or the television show experience to your own, and kind of just make meaning. And the cool thing is that you wake up in the morning and hopefully you're not still bummed out or whatever, and you've learned something about yourself.
Yes.
But I really do think that the Last Word, despite the fact I couldn't remember one of the stars' names or the title of it.
But see, the people never remember what you say. They remember how you make them feel. And that's the same with films. You remembered the feeling.
Yes, I did. And so I liked it because it was all about, how do you want to be remembered? And here's a person at the end of her life, or she thought was getting close to the end of her life, that she wanted to just get it all out finally. She became a hermit. And what she was finding out was that people didn't like her. She was a tough person at a time where women weren't supposed to be tough. And hearing it, and not just assuming it, changed her. And I'm not giving anything away in just telling you that they ended up being quite close, and it enriched both of their lives from knowing each other.
Beautiful. Gonna check that out ASAP. Dean, you can share closing thoughts with our listeners, and do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, Chelsea, I it's been great talking to you. I, as my daughters would tell me, I stalked you a little bit online, and just to learn a little bit more about you. You've got a ton of ambitions and a ton of accomplishments at a young age. And I think that one of the things I thought of as I was kind of looking at what your journey's been like, before I knew that you had a parent who had passed away, and knew what kind of inspired you to go into this topic in your podcast, is I just think that people should not limit themselves to the experiences and the scope of what they want to do, what they hope to do. Push yourself and make a life. Try and there's an organization out there called Live a Great Story that sells lots of stickers and that has great blogs and things like that. And the reason I said stickers is because I've got it on my computer, trying to be a good, millennial. Anyway, but truly, that's what, if you aim for that every day and you take everything that's what you think is the worst today, down the road, it becomes part of your story and it affects the rest of your life and the good things too, And so I would just tell people that, live that great story, do the things that you think are challenging, just try them out. Don't let money hold you back. There's so many things you could do to enrich in your life that don't take resources, or that you'll be glad you risked some resources if you're that type of person. So do that and then share it with your family, talk to them about it. And at a certain point in time, broach the subject, and you can do it in a funny way, a wee funny way. You could say, a wee funny way. You could say, talk about it in terms of a bucket list. Talk about it in terms of why you have a bucket list. Hey, my bucket list. Well, Dad, you're only 55. What are you doing with a bucket list already? Hey, you never know. Right. So you don't start a bucket list. And so that's the way you do it. So live the life, talk about your life, and make sure people know that these are things. I'm telling you these things because I'm hoping that these are things people can remember me by or learn from me. So
I love that, Dean. I couldn't agree more. It's never too early to start talking about all of this. We could all have a bucket list.
And you're not going to ever have cool things for people to remember if you don't take risks. And as I look at what you've done in your career and everything, you definitely take risks. Every audition you've ever been on, this business you've started with the podcast, those are the things that build your character up and make your story that people will talk about.
Well, thank you, Dean. I really appreciate that. And same with you. And it's just, it's like you just got to start. And I've been open about this. Just my last thought is I always thought one day comedically, when I was more of a known entity, I had really cool ideas about what I could do if and when that moment came. And then after years of pursuing, it just hit me. And mostly because of my mom's stage 4 diagnosis, I was like, wait a second. I might not ever be ready for now. My name is this and I could do that. And even if that were to happen, I could be 75 and that would be great. If I became like a successful Jewish grandmother on a TV show, yay for me. But I don't want to start, having my mission and what I stand for then. So I think anyone listening, start something now, take a risk now. It's never too soon. And like you said, taking risks makes you interesting. So
Right. And there's a lot of ways to do it. I mean, you could become an avatar and live a whole life that way.
Hey, that's with the metaverse. That's part 2. We can just talk about that. Dean, where can people connect with you online and find the Love Always Project and sign up for all the good things you've going on?
Yeah, we want to build this grassroots effort up. So if you could go to lovealwaysproject.org, by all means, like and share, but also follow.
Yes, please give the Love Always Project a follow. I will be doing that as well today.
Thank you.
Dean, it was so great speaking with you. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see where the Love Always Project goes. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Chelsea. Best of luck to you too.
Yodo, you only die once.